First things first, Sam, if you're reading this, I just want to say that I hate you. I hate your homemade granola, I hate your preachy, straight-edge boyfriend, and I really, really hate your stupid bucket list. Now, if you're reading this and you're not Sam, which is a lot more likely, I guess, let me explain. The summer before I started college, I had to fill out this roommate matchmaking questionnaire since I was going to be living in the dorms. The questionnaire was all multiple choice, so there wasn't much room for originality. Suffice it to say, I wasn't confident this questionnaire would find me the perfect roommate. So when I filled mine out, I didn't put a lot of thought into the answers. The section for hobbies gave a pretty limited list of options. I chose listening to music. Basic, I know. Reading, and because I had to select at least 3 options, spending time outdoors. I'd been camping a couple times with friends from high school, and my family always made bonfires in the summer, so I figured it was a more honest answer than anything else on the list. Sam, on the other hand, is about as outdoorsy as a person can get. She invited me rock climbing the first day I met her, and every weekend after until I finally broke down and said I was more of a hiking kind of girl. To be fair, it's not a lie. I do prefer hiking to the idea of dangling off a sheer cliff face. But I should have known this wouldn't get me off the hook. The rock climbing invite stopped, but soon, Sam started begging me to go on hiking trips. She has this stupid bucket list where she wants to hike every single trail in the United States. I still don't understand what her parameters were for choosing which trails counted toward the list, but whatever they weren't strict enough. See, I eventually agreed to go on a hike with her. A couple, actually. The first one went fine. We carpooled to this nature preserve just past city limits, hiked the trail there, and drove back to our dorm that night. The worst part of the day was putting on the homemade bug spray she'd packed. I honestly think I would have gotten bitten up less without it. Other than that, the day was fine. But the second hiking trip was a mistake. A series of mistakes, actually. The first was that I drove to the trailhead alone. As it turns out, Sam has a very loose definition of what qualifies as a trail. The day of the second trip, I got lost for almost an hour trying to find the trail. Eventually, I gave her a call. "Hello?" She answered. I still remember how annoyed she sounded. She didn't like to use her phone when she was connecting with nature. "I'm lost," I told her. "I don't see the sign anywhere." "That's because there isn't one," she said. Heat prickled up the back of my neck. I couldn't believe her. "Then how am I supposed to know where the trail is?" "There's a mile marker at the start. Where are you?" I explained that I was at the end of a dirt road off the nearest highway, sitting with my flashers on by a dead-end sign. She told me to go ahead and park, then walk straight ahead. I should have turned around and left. That was my second mistake, but at least I hesitated, mostly because I didn't see her car anywhere. I'll give myself credit for that much. When I asked about it though, she just told me she'd parked up the road and was already on the trail. She told me to start walking and that she'd wait for me to catch up. Before I could ask where I could find her, she hung up. I tried calling again, but it went straight to voicemail. Typical, I thought. I wasn't much in the mood for a hike at this point, but I wasn't about to let all that hassle be for nothing. I walked straight from where I parked toward the tree line, just like Sam had told me. When I got to the edge of the woods, I found a gap in the trees and a worn, rotted wooden post with illegible carvings at the top. A trail marker, I assumed. As I began walking, I noticed the trail itself was just as neglected as the sign. The trees and bushes all around were so thick that even the sunlight had a hard time breaking through. Everything was overgrown. It was about 6 p.m. when I got onto the trail, and the way things looked around me, it was like the sun had already set. Sam said she liked evening hikes because of the cooler air, but personally, I'd take midday heat over getting lost in the woods past sundown any day. I walked for almost a half hour before I tried calling Sam again. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. At this point, it was getting dark. I kept walking for a while longer, but between how early the sun sets in autumn and the looming trees all around, it seemed more like midnight than a quarter till 7. and I was ready to give up. The only thing that kept me from turning around right then and there was the idea that something had happened to Sam. It didn't seem likely, but so hot its cold, tingling feeling had started to spread down my face and neck and into the center of my chest. So, despite my better judgment, I kept moving forward. But the further I progressed, the less clear the path became. It was like the trail had led straight into the woods. All I could do was guess that I was still following what was left of the trail. After a while, though, it became clear that I wasn't. Soon, I was wading through nettles and ducking underneath branches. The trail had disappeared behind me. Shadows and tangled branches surrounded me on all sides. My chest tightened. I was lost. I started calling out Sam's name, but there was only silence. My voice was the only sound in the woods. I remember hoping this would make me easier to find. Stay calm, I whispered to myself. Thankfully, I still had reception, so I pulled out my phone and sent another message to Sam. Where are you? I waited a few seconds for her to reply, then decided to call her. At first, there was no reply, but as I prepared to call again, I heard footsteps not too far off. Sam? I shouted. I was so relieved I almost started to laugh. Sam, over here. The footsteps stopped. At the same time, my phone began to ring. Sam. I picked it up right away. Where the hell are you? Over here, I shouted again. The footsteps resumed. Over where? Sam said. She sounded exasperated. I doubled back to the first marker and have been waiting for like an hour. Are you still by your car or something? Sam kept talking, but suddenly I couldn't understand her. My body was frozen, and my mind was similarly stalled. After a few seconds, I swallowed hard, then drew the phone close to my lips so I could stay as quiet as possible. There's something following me, I whispered. It's probably an animal. You're on the trail? Sam, there's someone following me, I repeated. The footsteps were closer now. I bit my lip hard to keep from making a sound. My eyes were welling with tears. I began pleading like a child. I don't remember what I said. I only remember feeling completely helpless. A beam of light cut through the trees, scanning back and forth near where I was standing. It felt like I had been branded with a white hot iron when the beam hit my face. I dropped my phone and let out a sharp yelp. I hated myself for making a sound, but I couldn't help it. This accidental, primal sound just erupted out of my body. I don't know how, but I started to run. In the same moment, so did whoever was following me. I'll never forget the sound of someone crashing behind me through the woods at full speed, the steady thrum of footfall on hard earth, the cracking branches and rustling grass, the animalistic heave of their breathing as they got closer. I wasn't even sure I was running in the right direction until I noticed the darkness had softened. The sun had nearly set, but there was light coming through the trees now, and all I could think of was sprinting toward it. Every step and shards of pain shot up through my legs, and breathing between my now frantic sobs was nearly impossible. But stopping wasn't an option. Whoever was behind me was faster than I was. They'd been steadily gaining on me since the moment I'd taken off running, and my only advantage was a slight head start. They were almost close enough to touch me now. I could feel their presence at my back. I think I was screaming when I finally crashed through the tree line. My mind goes blank when I try to recall. All I remember is seeing my car and losing all other senses. I couldn't feel the pain in my legs or hear my pursuer behind me. I just needed to get to my car. When I finally did, I ran straight into the door like an insect bouncing against a light. The next few moments were a panicked blur of finding my keys, getting inside, and locking all the doors as quickly as I could manage. I knew I wasn't in any state to drive, but I was already squealing into reverse. My body was working on its own without any regard for my mind. I looked all around for the person who chased me, but there was no sound. The meadow between my car and the tree line was empty. I slammed on the brakes, fearing the worst. My already white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel grew tighter as I checked the back seat in my rearview mirror. But there was no one there. Despite myself, I parked and turned my whole body to look more closely. All clear. There was no one around. This was the moment that broke me. I wrapped my arms around the steering wheel, curled myself around it, and sobbed so hard they came out silent. I cried harder than I ever have in my life. Harder than when I'd lost my first dog, Casey, or when I'd found out my father was sick. I ached down to my soul and let it all flow out of me until the air in my car was just as heavy with pain as I was. That was the moment I realized that someday I would die. Someday I wouldn't unlock my car in time. Someday something chasing me would catch me, and that would be that. And I would be gone. It was dark by the time I could move again. By that time I felt nothing. My earlier episode had wrung me dry of any emotion. I started driving home. Not back to the dorm, but home. I executed every step by the book, the way I had when I'd taken my first driving test. Somehow, focusing on this helped. It gave me control. I obeyed the speed limit. I kept my hands at 10 and 2. I kept my eyes on the road. I kept my eyes on the road. I kept my eyes on the road. And because I kept my eyes on the road, I saw him coming. I saw him running with perfect posture, out of the trees and in front of my car, staring me dead in the eye. His face was as blank as mine. I sped up. I can still see the limpness of his body rolling over my hood and windshield. The sound was too many things at once, but I mostly remember the explosive drumming of his limbs against my roof. I didn't look in the rear view. I was sure if I did, I would see him running behind me. I told myself this, knowing he couldn't be, knowing he'd never run again. But still, he follows me. It's been days and he's still following me. I'm writing this now because they found his body. They found him, and I have to tell someone. They talked about him on the local news. He had a name. He was real. They're looking for his killer. Sam doesn't know anything. She thinks I got spooked by an animal. She doesn't know I saved myself when I still thought she was somewhere on the trail with a killer. She doesn't know that I became a killer myself. I mean, I guess she does if she's reading this now. But if she isn't, all she knows is that I got lost. She thinks it's hilarious, actually. I wasn't on a trail at all. The one I was supposed to go to wasn't for another 10 miles up the road. I've always been bad with directions. Anyway, I don't know if I can keep this secret anymore. I don't know if it'll matter if I do. I never went back for my phone. Someone will find it. Someone will find me. I can't run forever. He'll catch up to me someday.